In July 2015, the world's gaze was drawn to England's second city by the news of a discovery. Resting in a dimly lit basement vault at the University of Birmingham, a parchment was found. According to the reports, this modest, torn, yellowing fragment of ancient goatskin was a page from the oldest known Quran, a precious relic so old that its scribe may himself have been a disciple of the Prophet of Islam. My name is Mohammed Ali. I'm an artist, I live in Birmingham, and I'm a Muslim. When I first heard the news of the discovery, I couldn't quite believe that an Islamic artifact, apparently of huge historic and religious significance, had shown up out of the blue in, of all places, the British city I call home, so far from the birthplace of Islam and more than a millennium after its creation. I felt I should know more. Were these stories true? Was the parchment really as old as rumoured? And how did this precious relic come to rest within the red brick walls of a university in the heart of England? What would such a discovery mean for the city of Birmingham, for Islam, and for the wider world? And so, I decided to embark upon my own journey of discovery to find out the truth about the Birmingham Quran. I've travelled a few miles from home to meet Josephine Frank and Sarah Kilroy from the Cadbury Research Library here at the University of Birmingham, which houses the Mingani collection of Middle Eastern manuscripts. This is where the Birmingham Quran was found, and today I'm going to see it. Sarah Kilroy, how are you?
Head of Conservation
Yes,
here.
great,
Hi.
yes, oh yes,
I'll be
great.
putting the manuscript in a second, so
Yeah.
I've set the stand up in the corner, so if you're happy with that position,
Over there,
I'll
yeah.
bring it over
Perfect.
there. If I just open it up.
Well, it looks like paper, but it's parchment, isn't it? I don't think I've got the courage to touch it myself.
The parchment would be made of goat or sheep skin,
Yep. So goat skin.
and then the ink on top is this light, beautiful, rich dark brown with these few red decorations, which may have been added later.
It's difficult to convey my feelings at this moment as I attempt to comprehend the significance of the item displayed before me. These few simple leaves of early Arabic calligraphy, composed neatly in surahs, chapters, and ayat, verses, comprise what may be the very earliest known transcription of the word of Allah.
It's 2 pages here, but there's 4 in total, isn't it?
So four sides of writing,
sides of writing,
and 2 pages, which we sometimes also call folios.
It covers on the right-hand side, we have Surah 18, which is Al-Kahf, the cave. And then on the second page, we have the end of Surah Al-Maryam, Surah 19, and then the beginning of Surah 20, which is known as Taha. And I think we have 40 verses of Surah Al-Taha.
وتحسبهم أيقاظا وهم رقود ونقلبهم ذات اليمين وذات الشمال وكلبهم باسط ذراعيه بالوصيد لو اطلعت عليهم لوليت منهم فرارا
As Josephine told me, the only full chapter found in the Birmingham Quran is known as Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th surah, also known as the chapter of the cave. It tells of a group of young men who, in fear of persecution for their faith, hid in a cave where they fell asleep and, watched over by Allah, slept for 309 years, finally awaking to a much changed world where news of their emergence from the cave and their prolonged slumber was received as proof of Allah's divine power. To me, this tale of dormancy and reawakening seemed a fitting and poetic metaphor for the loss and rediscovery of the Quran fragments. The Birmingham Quran forms part of the Mingani collection, an assortment of over 3,000 Middle Eastern manuscripts and artifacts that were collected in the 1920s by an Assyrian called Alphonse Mingana. Mingana was commissioned to bring together this collection of Middle Eastern religious texts by Edward Cadbury, a grandson of John Cadbury, eponymous founder of the famous cocoa and chocolate company, hence the collection's current home at the Cadbury Research Library. But when the Mingana collection was first brought to England from the Middle East, the Cadbury Research Library hadn't yet been established. Its home was Woodbrook Quaker Study Centre. But how did it come to be there? Who was Alphonse Mingana? And what was his relationship with the famous Cadbury chocolate-making family? I visited the Woodbrook Quaker Study Centre to meet Helen Rowlands, who has studied the history of the Mingana collection extensively.
Hi Helen, nice to meet you.
Hi, Mohammed. Welcome to Woodbrook.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Helen, I hear that you have a great interest in the Mingana collection, this very building we're in here right now. Originally, this was the home of that. Could you tell us about Woodbrook Study Centre?
This building, Woodbrook, was George Cadbury's family home at the time when the chocolate factory was being built up in Bourneville. But he had quite a large family, and as the family grew and as his situations changed, he actually moved out of this building and offered it to the Quakers to use to be a college and a study centre. The connection with Mingana began in the 1920s when our first director of studies, a man called Rendell Harris, met Alphonse Mingana. They were both academic professors studying Middle Eastern culture and religion, and Rendell Harris invited Alphonse Mingana to come to Selly Oak. He was born near Mosul, and to study alongside him here in Woodbrook at that time. Later on, Edward Cadbury, who was one of the sons of George Cadbury, got interested in what Mingana was doing and actually sponsored him for 2 or 3 years to go on visits to different parts of the Middle East to collect manuscripts and bring them back to Selly Oak.
In these papers, we can tell the story of how Mingana and Cadbury went about to collect the manuscripts and to bring them back.
Josephine Frank at the Cadbury Research Library.
This handwritten note, it's on letter paper from the Victoria Hotel in Cairo, Egypt, and it's dated to the 13th of December 1929. Dear Mr. Cadbury, I have just
now finished packing 2 large boxes containing about 300 Arabic manuscripts. I shall insure them tomorrow and send them to England to your address as agreed. You see that your generosity has again borne fruits. With kindest regards, Alphonse Mingana.
This is the next letter here. This is signed by Edward Cadbury and addressed to Dr. Mingana, dated the 16th of October 1930, and it reads, Dear Dr. Mingana, I am much obliged
for your letter of the 15th. What wonderful good fortune we have in getting manuscripts. I quite agree with you that the strong room soon will not be big enough. I am enclosing a cheque for £300. With kind regards, yours sincerely, Edward Cadbury.
Alphonse Mingana would be in the Middle East, in Egypt, speaking to local dealers, trying to get hold of interesting manuscripts for the collection here in Birmingham. And after he had identified these manuscripts, he would write to Cadbury and request a cheque for a specific amount of money. Edward Cadbury would send us cheque, and then Mingana could purchase them and insure them and pack them and send them to Birmingham.
In all, Alphonse Mingana made 3 journeys to the Middle East during the 1920s to collect religious texts and artifacts on behalf of Edward Cadbury. He also acquired some pieces from European dealers who sent him manuscripts of interest from their catalogues. Once pieces had been examined, the decision to purchase them or not was made. Any unwanted manuscripts were returned to the dealer. The precise details of where, when and how Mingana acquired the 2 leaves of parchment that have come to be known as the Birmingham Quran are not known. But a receipt found in the Mingana archive offers a tantalizing clue. It shows that in 1936, Mingana purchased 7 parchment leaves of an early Kufic Quran from a Dutch dealer called Eric von Scherling. Experts at the Cadbury Research Library believe the Birmingham Quran was probably amongst this bundle of manuscripts. If true, the princely sum paid for this priceless artifact was £11. That's just £700 today. So, it's likely that by 1936, the Birmingham Quran had travelled by land and sea to a new home in Britain as part of the Mingana collection. And there it remained for almost 80 years, its true age and significance unknown, until one day in 2009, when it came to the attention of a PhD student called Alba Fideli.
Everything started because I read a small footnote in a book from an article by a German professor about the Birmingham Quran. And I thought, okay, Birmingham Quran, what is this? I found that the manuscript was here in Birmingham, and I found that it was available online in the virtual manuscript room. And then I started to study the object. Its writing, the script of the manuscript is particular, and from the script you can recognize that it's a very ancient manuscript.
But just how ancient? Well, if reports are to be believed, the Birmingham Quran is about 1400 years old, suggesting it was made in the early to mid 7th century. This date has become a point of contention amongst academics, with some arguing that it cannot be so old. To put the dating in context, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born in Mecca in 570 AD. From 609 AD until his death in 632 AD, the Prophet received a series of revelations from Gabriel. These revelations, the word of Allah, became the Quran. At the time of the Prophet's death, the Quran was recorded in full only in the memories of the Prophet's followers. But before long, the process of compiling and codifying the Quran began. And it's believed that the third Caliph, the religious ruler of the early Islamic world, Uthman, codified the Quran in the form familiar to modern Muslims in around 650 AD, at a time when written Arabic script was still evolving.
The mainly nomadic tribes living on the Arabian Peninsula in the 6th and 7th century had lived largely an oral culture. So poetry was really important, but not many documents had been written down. And Arabic script only developed at that time and was still kind of in the process of development. It resembles modern day Arabic, but one or two things of modern standard Arabic are missing, and these are the signs to differentiate between the letters of similar shape as well as the vowel signs.
These signs, also known as diacritical dots, help to differentiate between similar looking Arabic letters. Dr. Alain Georges is a senior lecturer in Islamic art at the University of Edinburgh. Dr. George agreed to help me to try to join up the dots, speaking to me from Beirut.
Diacritical dots exist in all of the earliest dated Islamic inscriptions, including two papyri, which are from Egypt and dated 643, and the earliest dated Islamic inscription, which is from modern Saudi Arabia, from the desert. It's a rock carving. In the name of God, I, Zuhair, wrote this at the time of the death of Omar in the year 24. That's 24 after the Hijrah, which is 645 AD. So one of the things my thesis and some other recent studies have shown is that there's nothing surprising about a manuscript that would have diacritical dots in the 7th century. And all of the Qur'ans that we have from this period, all of the fragments that we have, do also have diacritical dots.
So, the mid-7th century dating of the Birmingham Quran stands up to paleographic analysis. Would it stand up to analysis of an altogether more scientific manner?
I'm David Cheval, and I work at the University of Oxford at the Oxford Radiocarbon Accelerator Unit.
Could you tell us what is the purpose of carbon dating, and could you give us some examples of its application today?
The main purpose for radiocarbon dating is just to work out how old things are. And this has lots of different applications in many different areas of science, including archaeology and oceanography and climate science.
So how accurately can you date a sample through carbon dating?
So for something about 1,000 years old, you can get a measurement from the AMS instrument with an error of plus or minus 10 years.
Would love to see your laboratory here, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So this is the AMS, which is basically a very fancy weighing scale and a very sensitive weighing scale. AMS stands for Accelerator Mass Spectrometer. There are 3 naturally occurring types of carbon, which we call isotopes. So they're all carbon, but they just weigh different amounts. So it's carbon-12 and carbon-13, which are both stable, and carbon-14, which is the radioactive one, which we're interested in. And so in this machine, we measure how much carbon-14 there is and compare it to how much carbon-12 there is. And from that, we can work out how old the sample is.
So could you just reiterate now, the Quran sample, when it was brought here, just the process of how the Quran sample would have gone through this machine?
So the carbon from any sample would be put in at the start of the machine, and then it's accelerated around. It's basically like a scale extrix track around the course of the machine, and only the ions, so the atoms that weigh exactly the right amount, make it to the end of the scale extrix track, and all the other ones crash out and hit the edge.
So this is the end here, this point here.
Yeah. So this is the very end. When we're measuring a sample, at the very end here is the detector for the carbon-14, and normally you measure atoms in huge numbers that you can't even think because they're so big, but this just has a counter at the end, and it just clicks round. It goes 1, 2, 3 or whatever, depending how old the sample is, and so we're really looking for the needle in the haystack.
So, a significant portion of the proof of the Birmingham Quran status as the oldest in the world rested on the presence of just a few atoms of carbon. And while no radiocarbon dating result is absolutely conclusive, the experts at the Oxford Radiocarbon Accelerator Unit are confident in the accuracy of the date range they arrived at. With a probability of 95%, they dated the Birmingham Quran to between 568 AD and 645 AD. The Cadbury Research Library received the result of the carbon dating in March 2014.
Do you remember the reactions at the time, or just yourselves even? Was there a moment where it was like, oh my God, this is going to change everything?
When we sat with the results together and really tried to take in what it meant, and then I phoned the laboratory the next day to check that we had read it right and were understanding the graph correctly. That moment, I won't ever forget that, actually. It was a strange thing walking around knowing that and looking at the people around you and knowing they don't know this yet. But it's amazing.
We've outlined how the Birmingham Quran arrived in the city, and how, through paleographic and radiocarbon analysis, it can be dated with some confidence to the period just after the death of the Prophet. But what drove the Cadburys, a Quaker family of industrialists and chocolatiers, to commission Alphonse Mengana to collect more than 3,000 religious manuscripts and artifacts encompassing the 3 major Abrahamic religions, Islam, Christianity and Judaism, from the Middle East?
The Cadbury family were Quakers, and education was always a key value. In this instance, I think it was about a more scholarly form of education, not just the basic literacy. It was about how can we better understand the different peoples, the different faiths, the different cultures of the world. And so the motivation to preserve early writings from different faith traditions, I think, would have been quite strong for them. The Mingana collection contains Christian manuscripts, it contains Muslim manuscripts and some things from other traditions. So it's quite eclectic and would have been about helping people to learn and understand one another better, whatever culture they came from. And I think Edward Cadbury had a vision of Birmingham being a centre of scholarly learning in that field.
So it seems Edward Cadbury's commissioning of the Mingana collection and the Cadbury family's philanthropic support of the Woodbrook Study Centre may in part have been born of a desire to engender interfaith relations founded on mutual understanding and respect. But what, if anything, survives today of his idealistic vision? Dr. Chris Allen, lecturer in social policy at the University of Birmingham and author of Islamophobia.
You know, since the 1970s, we've had the Centre for the Study of Islam and Christian-Muslim Relations, where I did my own PhD and my doctoral research for 5 years there. And I think that really what this is about Birmingham being a really important place where people do talk across faiths and across their differences. You know, you look at the history of Birmingham, it was once called the City of 1,000 Industries, and now they talk about it being a city of 1,000 religions. You know, you've got many like different religions sort of coexisting alongside each other peacefully every single day. And I think it is a wonderful space that's so diverse, and actually sometimes I think we undersell how great Birmingham is in terms of that interfaith and kind of cross-faith sort of relations.
In the 1970s, the Selly Oak Colleges Federation set up a department specially for the study of Christianity and Islam and for the fostering of dialogue between the two faiths. And that gained quite a reputation worldwide amongst academics particularly, and is now part of the work that has been taken into the University of Birmingham.
Do you think the setting up of this Centre for Islam and Christianity in the 1970s, had it not been for Mingana and Edward Cadbury, do you think that contributed to that being here in the city?
Yes, I'd say it was absolutely central to it being here. The existence of the collection was one of the driving factors towards that department being established here.
The notion that a greater level of communication and engagement between diverse communities can lead to a greater mutual understanding and harmony is difficult to argue against, especially when one considers the fundamental commonalities that exist between what, at face value, may appear to be disparate cultures. David Thomas is Professor of Interreligious Relations in the Department of Theology and Religion at the University of Birmingham. For the last few years, he's been involved in the creation of the most comprehensive study ever made of Muslim-Christian historical relations.
If we look at the Quran, we see stories there that resemble very closely stories that come from the Bible, the story of Noah, many of the stories of Abraham, the story of David, and more than any, the story of Jesus. These are very close to the stories as they occur in the Bible. And when we come to the moral stance of Christians and Muslims and to the actions that Christian Muslims do, there is a huge amount of similarity. I think Christians and Muslims, and I'm not talking about Islam because in many ways it's difficult to know what Islam is, just as it's difficult to know what Christianity is. But when Christians and Muslims, people who have put into practice the beliefs taught in the Islamic tradition and in the Christian tradition, when they are at their best, then they are actually acting and, strangely enough, believing very similar things.
I think there are strands probably present in each of the main faiths that link up across those faiths. So I was talking last night to a Sufi gentleman, and there are certain similarities between aspects of Sufism and aspects of Quakerism that I think where we saw the commonality, we saw the connection. And that's probably part of what Cadbury and Mingana and those people were looking for at the time. They were trying to say, we are all people of the book, we are all people of faith, and what connects us as people of faith is stronger than the things that are different between us.
It is a tragic irony of human nature that with near ubiquity, we desire peaceful and happy coexistence with others, yet are collectively plagued by our species' inclination toward perpetual conflict. However, it's vital to remember that billions of us, of all faiths, do manage every day to live in relative peace and contentment all over the planet. Despite the constant bombardment of doom-laden headlines, hope should remain. Can a look back into our past offer some optimism for our future?
Ordinary people who probably haven't wanted to accentuate the religious differences between them have very often lived together in relative harmony. In southeastern Europe, for example, for hundreds of years, under Ottoman rule, there was relative peace between Christians and Muslims living in the same villages, in the same vicinities. An example that is very often presented is of medieval Spain, Spain under Muslim rule from the 8th century to the 15th century. It's surprising how much harmony there seemed to be in communities where Christians and Muslims did live and work together. In 9th century Baghdad, Muslims were very happy and I would have thought relieved to regard Christians as their helpers when they were ill, because nearly every doctor, almost every single doctor, medical doctor in the early Islamic world was a Christian. Christians also performed a very important function in the early Islamic state in translating works of medicine, works of philosophy, works of science from Greek into Arabic so that Arabic-speaking Muslims could understand them. In a similar way, when we come to the 13th century, Muslims provided a similar duty for Christians in that they had preserved the works of the great philosophers of the ancient world, Plato and Aristotle, and it was through Muslim translations of these works that the Christians of Northern Europe at the time of, say, Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century were able to find out what these great philosophers had said.
One of the interesting features that emerged from my research as well is that we can detect some collaboration between Christian and Muslim scribes to make some of the earliest manuscripts of the Quran. It is recorded in Islamic religious traditions, the Hadith, where we have several stories about companions of the Prophet or their immediate followers who were in the very first generation of Islam. And these people go to Christians in Iraq to get the Quran copied. This was something that was relatively well known and uncontroversial during the classical period of Islam.
So, in the very act of their physical constitution, some of the earliest Quranic manuscripts were born of a positive collaborative relationship between Muslims and Christians, who, through the sharing of knowledge, achieved, if only fleetingly, collective betterment. Today I've come to the launch of an exhibition at the University of Birmingham, whose centrepiece is the Birmingham Quran.
For all of us at the university, it's an immense privilege to have come to realise that we hold here in our own collections such a global treasure.
In a time where Muslims are in the spotlight in this country, and perhaps a time where Islamophobia is on the increase and perceptions of Muslims can be negative in the media, how important is a discovery like this, do you think? Mohammed Ali is a journalist whose work often deals with issues of faith and identity.
Well, I think coming to see the Quranic manuscript today it had a huge impact on me personally. I've travelled quite far to come here, and just walking through the campus, seeing these flags up, celebrating the fact that they have this Quranic manuscript here it really shows that there's this pride in having it, because it's not just a British Muslim thing. It's becoming part of our heritage in a way as British Muslims, but also it's part of the wider human heritage of human history, because it's celebrating human endeavour, and also just being able to see something that is over 14 centuries old is something that should be celebrated, and it's something that I'm very proud to see tonight. For me, seeing the 3 chapters up there of Surah Taha, which mentions the story of Moses, and the Surah Maryam, or Surah Mary, each chapter of Mary, which talks about Mary and Jesus, and also the other chapter about the ancient prophets. It really brings together the diversity of our Islamic belief, and also that it's about coexistence, and it's about recognizing prophets from other traditions as well. So Islam is very holistic and very encompassing, and I think these particular pages out of the manuscript really a testament to that message of diversity, pluralism and coexistence.
My name's Abdullah Saif. I'm a Brummy born and bred, and I'm today coming here with the hat of the Muslim Association of Britain. When they unearthed this leaf, this parchment of the Quran here in Birmingham, although obviously it came from abroad, it kind of showed me, or kind of told me almost, that this is home. You know what I mean? Islam is perfectly comfortable here. As a Muslim, you're perfectly comfortable here. You may have come from where this parchment came from back in the day, but you're here now, and look what it's done today. It's brought communities together, it's brought people together, and people have revived this sense of wanting to know one another through this message, or through these parchments that the Quran come with, and it's that Islam kind of, for me, portrays and brings people together. So if that's what it does, then I'm totally happy, and because it's done this, I'm extremely happy.
At the beginning of this journey, there were some key questions I wanted to find answers to. Was the Birmingham Quran really as old as reported? Well, yes, paleographic analysis and radiocarbon dating can place it with some confidence to the early to mid 7th century, probably not long after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, making it amongst the oldest known Qur'ans in the world. Baddeley, the PhD student who recognized the significance of the Birmingham Quran, has since matched it with other pages, likely originating from the same manuscript housed at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. I also discovered that its presence in Birmingham is thanks to the industrialist Edward Cadbury. Had he not commissioned the Mingani collection, it's possible the Birmingham Quran may have lain forever in anonymity, or even been lost altogether. Cadbury's vision of Birmingham as a global centre of cross-cultural engagement and study was prescient. His legacy continues in David Thomas's unparalleled study of historical Muslim-Christian relations, to give but one example. Lastly, I asked what might be the wider implications of the Birmingham Quran's re-emergence. What would such a discovery mean for the city of Birmingham, for Islam, and for the wider world? A recent event celebrating the Birmingham Quran's public display was attended by throngs of visitors from across the city, a crowd that encompassed the rich cultural demography of 21st century Britain. Many expressed pride in their city, having become the adoptive home of this historic treasure. All those I spoke with welcomed the chance to congregate and communicate with others in such a mixed setting, and acknowledged the Birmingham Quran's role in bringing about such an opportunity. Islam is a faith adhered to by 1.6 billion people around the world. Yet we live in an age in which perceptions of this entire religion, a fifth of the global population, are being grotesquely skewed by a myopic fixation upon the acts of an infinitesimal minority of extremists. In 2016, the world's most powerful political office was won despite, or perhaps because of, campaign trail promises of division building and exclusion. In many places across the world, we are witnessing a resurgence of the politics of intolerance and hatred. Creeping normalization of the so-called alt-right movement in America. Far-right movements in Europe that ride ever closer to power on a wave of anti-immigrant sentiment. The legitimization, whether intended or incidental, of racial prejudice in Britain in the run-up to and aftermath of the EU referendum. Now, as cracks appear, rifts open, chasms deepen, as the mood of fear, enmity and unrest washes over us, pervades the collective subconscious, gradually alters us, shaping our attitudes and colouring our actions. We must resist the primal urge to retreat to the us versus them mindset. We must come together and engage, without prejudice, all others, spanning the full gamut of origin, doctrine, and opinion.